Imagine waking up one morning to find your biggest problem solved by a complete stranger. Marcus Chen stared at the eviction notice taped to his apartment door, his hands trembling as he read the bold red letters. 72 hours. That's all he had left before losing the tiny studio that had been his sanctuary for 3 years. The freelance graphic design work had dried up faster than he could have imagined, and his savings account showed a balance that made his stomach churn. $12.37. He was 28 years old, college-educated, and about to become homeless in downtown Seattle. The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd designed marketing materials for luxury condos just blocks away from where he might soon be sleeping on the street. That evening, as Marcus sat on his fire escape, watching the city lights blur through tears he refused to let fall, he heard footsteps in the hallway. A gentle knock echoed through his door. When he opened it, he found an elderly woman with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, wearing a simple blue cardigan that had seen better days. "Are you Marcus?" she asked, her voice carrying a slight accent he couldn't quite place. "Yes, ma'am. Can I help you?" She smiled, the kind of smile that seemed to hold decades of stories. "My name is Elena Vasquez. I live in apartment 4B, just down the hall. I heard about your situation." Marcus felt his cheeks burn with embarrassment. Word traveled fast in their small building. "I'm sorry if the stress has made me loud or anything. I'm trying to figure things out." Elena shook her head gently. "No, dear. You've been nothing but kind since you moved in. Always holding the door, always saying good morning." She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. "I want to help." Inside was a cashier's check for $3,000, enough to cover his rent for the next 4 months, plus late fees. Marcus stared at the check, his mind racing. "Mrs. Vasquez, I can't accept this. This is too much. You don't even know me." "I know enough," she said simply. "I know you helped Mrs. Patterson carry her groceries when her hip was bothering her. I know you fixed young Tommy's bicycle in the courtyard without being asked. I know you're a good person going through a hard time." The next morning, Marcus walked to the bank in a daze. The check was real. Elena Vasquez had saved him from homelessness, and he didn't even know her last name until yesterday. But as he stood in line at the bank, something nagged at him. $3,000 wasn't pocket change for anyone, especially someone living in their modest apartment building. Where had Elena gotten this money, and why him? Over the following weeks, Marcus threw himself into finding work with a renewed energy. The weight of Elena's generosity pushed him to hustle harder than he ever had. He landed a contract with a local restaurant chain, then another with a startup downtown. Slowly, his bank account began to recover. But his curiosity about Elena grew stronger each day. He started paying attention to her routine. She left every Tuesday and Thursday at exactly 9 in the morning, carrying a small leather bag. She returned around noon, always looking tired, but somehow lighter. On Saturdays, she received visitors, other elderly people who spoke in hushed tones and left with the same leather bag she carried on her weekday trips. One Thursday, Marcus decided to follow her. Elena walked 6 blocks to a small community center tucked between a laundromat and a used bookstore. The sign out front read, "West Side Senior Services." Marcus watched from across the street as she disappeared inside.
An hour later, she emerged with a young mother and 2 small children. The woman was crying, clutching Elena's hand as they spoke. Elena handed her an envelope, similar to the one she'd given Marcus, and the woman's tears turned from despair to relief. Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. The next Saturday, he positioned himself in the coffee shop across from his building and watched Elena's visitors more carefully. An elderly man with a walker, a middle-aged woman in scrubs who looked like she'd just finished a hospital shift, a teenager with a backpack covered in patches. Each one left with an envelope. That evening, Marcus knocked on Elena's door. When she answered, he was holding a check for $1,500, half of what she'd given him. "I got work. Good work. I want to start paying you back." Elena looked at the check, but didn't take it. "That's wonderful news about your job, Marcus, but I don't need repayment." "Mrs. Vasquez, Elena." I saw you today at the community center, and I've been watching on Saturdays." He felt awkward admitting it, but he pressed on. "You're helping other people too, aren't you?" Her expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. "Would you like to come in for tea?" Elena's apartment was smaller than his, but it felt warmer somehow. The walls were covered with photographs, children graduating, families at weddings, elderly couples celebrating anniversaries, people Marcus didn't recognize, but who all seemed to be looking at the camera with the same expression of gratitude he'd probably worn when Elena handed him that envelope. "My husband died 8 years ago," Elena began, settling into a worn armchair. "Roberto worked construction for 43 years. We never had children, but we saved every penny we could. When he passed, he left me with more money than I knew what to do with." She gestured to the photographs. "These are my children now. People who needed help when life knocked them down. Like you." Marcus sat quietly, processing what she was telling him. "But Elena, if you're giving away this much money to so many people, what happens when it runs out?" She smiled, that same mysterious smile from their first meeting. "It won't run out, dear. You see, Roberto and we bought a small apartment building in Ballard back in 1985, paid $8,000 for it. Can you imagine?" Marcus nearly choked on his tea. Property in Ballard was worth a fortune now. "I sold it last year for $2.4 million, after taxes and everything. I have more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes, so I decided to spend it on other people's lifetimes instead." The room fell silent, except for the ticking of an old clock on the mantel. "But, Elena, why secretly? Why not start a foundation or work with established charities?" Elena's expression grew thoughtful. "Have you ever tried to get help from a charity, Marcus? The applications, the waiting lists, the requirements? Sometimes people need help right now, today, this moment, not in 6 weeks after their paperwork is processed." She stood and walked to her kitchen window, looking out at the courtyard where Marcus had fixed Tommy's bicycle. "Besides, there's something beautiful about person-to-person kindness. When I hand someone an envelope, they're not getting help from an institution. They're getting help from their neighbor." Marcus felt something shift inside his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the tea. "The shocking part isn't that you're helping people," he said slowly. "It's that you're doing it without wanting anything in return. No recognition, no tax breaks, no naming rights. Just kindness." Elena turned back to him, and for the first time since he'd known her, she looked vulnerable. "I'm 74 years old, Marcus. I don't have much time left to make a difference. This is how I choose to spend it." Over the next few months, Marcus found himself becoming Elena's unofficial assistant. He helped her research people who needed help, verified their situations, and sometimes delivered envelopes when she wasn't feeling well. He learned about the single father working 3 jobs to support his disabled son, the college student who'd aged out of foster care and was sleeping in her car, the veteran struggling with PTSD who couldn't hold down steady work. Each story broke his heart and rebuilt it stronger. One evening in late spring, Elena called Marcus to her apartment. She looked frailer than usual, and he noticed she'd been moving more slowly lately. "I need to tell you something," she said, settling into her chair with obvious effort. "I've been to the doctor. The news isn't good." Marcus felt the world tilt slightly. "What do you mean?" "I have maybe 6 months, possibly less. The cancer is aggressive, and at my age, treatment would just make the time I have left miserable." The envelope she handed him this time was different, thicker. When he opened it, he found legal documents. "I am leaving you the remainder of the money, Marcus, about $800,000. I want you to continue what we've been doing."
Marcus stared at the papers, his hands shaking. "Elena, I can't. This is too much responsibility. What if I make mistakes? What if I help the wrong people?" She reached over and took his hand. Her skin was paper thin, but her grip was firm. "Do you remember what you told me about the shocking part?" he noted. "The most shocking thing isn't the money, dear. It's discovering that kindness is contagious. You've already caught it." Elena passed away on a Tuesday morning in September, peacefully in her sleep. Marcus found her when she didn't answer her door for their usual morning coffee. The funeral was small, but full of people he recognized from the photographs on her wall. Each person had a story about how Elena had changed their life at exactly the moment they needed it most. 6 months later, Marcus moved into a larger apartment, not for luxury, but for space. He needed room for the filing cabinets where he kept track of Elena's extended family, as he'd come to think of them. The single father had gotten promoted and was saving for his son's medical equipment. The college student had graduated and landed a job at a nonprofit. The veteran had started a small business helping other veterans transition to civilian life. But the most shocking discovery came when Marcus was going through Elena's personal effects. Hidden in her bedroom closet, he found a journal dating back 8 years. The entries revealed the truth about Elena's generosity. She hadn't started helping people after Roberto died. She'd been doing it their entire marriage, just on a smaller scale. Roberto had known and supported her efforts. The apartment building sale hadn't been the beginning of her philanthropy. It had just made it possible to help more people. The final entry, dated just a week before she died, read, "Found my successor today. Marcus doesn't know it yet, but he's going to help more people than I ever could." The money was never the point. The point was showing people that strangers can care about each other, that kindness doesn't require a reason, that sometimes the most shocking thing in the world is simply being human.
Today, Marcus runs what he calls the Elena Fund, though it's not officially registered anywhere. He still lives modestly, still works as a graphic designer, and still helps his neighbors carry groceries. But now he also carries envelopes, and he's learned to recognize the look in someone's eyes when they're about to lose hope. The most shocking thing about a stranger paying his rent wasn't the money. It was discovering that kindness, real kindness, doesn't end with a single act. It multiplies, spreads, and creates a network of people who believe in helping each other simply because they can. And sometimes, late at night, when he's preparing envelopes for the next day's deliveries, Marcus swears he can hear Elena's voice whispering, "The money was never the point, dear. The point was always the people."